Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Chloe. I'm a student at Johns Hopkins. I'm serving as the course liaison, and I'll be your Hopkins at Home main point of contact throughout the mini course. So I'll be attending each session with you, and I'll be here to answer any technical or logistical questions that you might have. Before we begin, I'll remind everyone to set their microphones to mute during the lecture, and we ask that you send any course-related questions in the chat as they come. The professor will be staying back a bit after the session to answer them. We are recording this lecture, however, we will remove any comments or discussion before sharing it with the public. So now I'll turn things over to Professor Adriano Pianisi from the Carey Business School.
Thank you very much, Chloe, and thank you everyone for being here. I am very excited to share what I've learned. As I said earlier, those are very wild times we live in, and we really need the ability to change everything. And I would like to start this lecture, this conversation with you, to ask you if you could change everything, where would you start? Because people normally join a course like this, they have something in mind that they would like to change. We want everybody to have these tools in their pocket so that they can bring them in their community, in their groups, and actually start making change happen. We need everyone to come alive and to who they are and find out what we can do together to make this change happen. I think if you're here, you're probably think that the world is filled with possibilities, but also with antiquated rules, and that probably there is a need for change. I was saying earlier that when I started doing this work 20 years ago, I explained that I was working in adaptation of groups and evolution of people and teams, people who shake their heads. Today, it has become kind of obvious. We all know that things need to change. And so many of the systems around us are limited, are broken, and can use an update. And that's why I'm so glad to see that I'm not alone in those thoughts. And I'm glad that you joined me today in deploying yourself. I've been very lucky in my career. I've been a professor at the Carey Business School for the last 10 years, teaching leadership and organizational change, but also doing consulting with my own private company. And I do online work, I do work in organization, I do organizational change, and in this work, inevitably, I do deploy myself, especially when I have to change or bring some change in some organization. And so a lot of my work and what I will share with you come from this in the field experience, which I have matured and learned in the course of 20 years working in a variety of organizations with brands that probably you know and love. And from working with those groups, I have seen patterns, what work and what doesn't work, and it's a real joy to bring you what I've learned, and so that you can use it for what you most care about. Those are ideas. There is inspiration because it's part of the leadership conversation, but there is a lot of perspiration as well, and there is a lot of hard work. So I don't want to just minimize that part. Normally leadership course emphasize the inspiration and de-emphasize the perspiration of the work, but that is really what we are doing. So I'm very excited to bring you those ideas and those tools. So coming together, I think it's a beautiful thing, and I feel very happy to be here with you to do it with you. So we're living, in adaptive times. The world we have known is moving into a different kind of world, which is the world we're moving to. And clearly this is a difficult transition, a transition that we will have to deal with, but also that we can take advantage of. Now, as I said earlier, you probably have received this weird deck of cards in your house. This was shipped to you. And what it was is a compendium, a general idea of the key concept that we will be touching on in this session. And this session will be really focused on trying to expand on this mystery that we call leadership. There is a lot of mystery, there is a lot of great fascination towards this world, especially in the Anglo-Saxon world, and I'm here to actually provide what I learned in being in this field for the past 20 years. We will do 4 sessions together, how to deploy yourself to be more successfully and to lead. This class will be intensive and fast. I will cover a lot of grounds, counting on the fact that, you can always ask me questions at any time by email, of course, as well as after 8 o'clock. I'm willing to stay here as long as it takes to clarify anything that is unclear or that you would like more information on. But I also have to say I have the ambition for this course to be a course that is truly helpful for you, that really bring you somewhere. So I recommend that you find some time to reflect or even journal between the session, because the concept I will share about, you will see, are very personal, very much concept that you can chew for a very long time. I also would like to encourage you to do some work on your own. That means, read maybe an article or something related to what you're doing. And as you probably know from the email you have received, in this class we have encouraged you to meet with a partner that can be somebody that can support your journey of personal growth and development. So another thing I want to say, we would love if you could meet with your partner in between session to actually just debrief and talk about what you're learning and whether or not you can understand my accent. Maybe that could be the first topic of conversation. I also encourage you between session and throughout those 4 meeting that we're going to have to actually do something, meaning apply some of this content in very real term. If there is something that you are thinking of doing, maybe this class can give you an extra input, the input that you need to actually do it. I want to clarify the work as you're working together as partners, because we have learned throughout the years that this kind of peer relationship can really maximize the learning. So what I encourage you, once you connect with your partner, is the number 1 rule of every great relationship, and that is to listen deeply. Also, in your conversation, don't make it about fixing, saving, advising, or correcting. This comes from Parker Palmer, The Circle of Trust. And, try instead to limit, don't give recommendation. Offer instead some time or maybe support on some of your connection. We know that these are kind of behavior that help a lot when you're coming together for a topic like this. Today, I want to focus and talk to you a little bit about leadership, but also about purpose, about the sources of energy that we draw from each of us, as well as the bandwidth that we have to use that energy in meaningful work. So I would like to start with this leaflet. This is a leaflet from a very known leadership company. The promise: great leaders, great team, great results. The challenge is, do you leaders know how to unleash the highest and best contribution of their team toward their organization's most critical priorities? And we go forward to say that there is a leadership crisis, that there is a transition from the industrial age to the knowledge worker age, trust in leaders at historic lows, strategic uncertainty, an ominous shortage of experienced leadership, the war for talent. We're supposed to clarify purpose, align system, unleash talent, and inspire trust. The solution to all this are 4 imperatives. Great leaders can be defined and have those 4 imperatives: inspire trust, clarify purpose, align system, unleash talent. Now, I don't know how do you feel about all this that I just read. I personally feel that when I have in my life tried to exercise leadership, those were not the right answer. They were not helpful. They would not actually give me what I was looking for to get. And I do hope that maybe you had a different experience. I think that the truth is that leadership is at a frontier. That even though the practice may be as ancient as human civilization, the area of leadership studies, it's still very young. Leadership as a study of practice and as a way to intervene in society, of culture, is, all things considered, an immature area. I would say almost an undisciplined area. We could even call it a field as of yet. Physics, engineer, law, economics. I mean, in leadership, we don't have an agreed upon set of basic terms upon which we could build a whole infrastructure or concept. Two economists might disagree at a very high level, what is the right economic policy for a country, but they would never disagree about what does it mean price, what is a market, or what does it mean demand. That's also true for physics, engineers, or legal scholars, but it's not true in the area of leadership. We not yet a common vocabulary upon which we can start arguing at higher levels of sophistication. Key words like management, power, authority, influence, citizenship. You pick any book on leadership and people will be using the same terms in very different way. So the word leadership itself, it's a very, very valued property, especially in the English-speaking world. It's a code word for success. It's a mark of excellence and highly desirable property. I say the English-speaking word because I don't know if you know that, but there is no word in leadership in Italian, French, Arabic, or German. I mean, the French, they call computer ordinateur, so they translate every word in their language. They call leadership with the English word. In Italy or in Germany, the word to identify leaders are rarely used out of actually evoking a past that is not that great. So while in leadership studies we struggle for a bit more rigor, there is also an incredible high demand for leadership in the business world. In the United States, leadership development is a $50 billion a year industry. So you can clearly see, as with a absence of agreed quality controls and combined with that high demand, there are obvious incentive to produce leadership pieces that have at best little rigor, at worst corporate mambo jumbo designed to sell and overpromise. And I have to say, in that category, I would put the STEAM theory of leadership that we have just read a moment ago. Jeffrey Pfeffers called those, talking about this, 4 trillion entering Googles, 15 main theories, 65 classifications, a whole plethora of information about leadership, and yet, no word in leadership. $50 billion spent annually in the US, and as I said earlier, 40,000 books available on Amazon on this topic, and this great book that was published 7 years ago that I think really pointed out the difficulty and the importance for all of us to become more discriminative leadership development consumers. So how do we do that? How do we become more discriminative consumers of leadership? How do we reorient and rethink and reconceptualize ideas about leadership beyond feel-good stories towards evidence-based and useful knowledge? I mean, beyond morality plays, courageous heroes on a horse, often white, I don't know if you noticed, and often leading people into battle. I want to say that leadership is not a position or a role. The leadership is an activity. It's something that you do, it's a practice. And that each of us has the opportunity to exercise leadership at any time, in any situation, regardless of if they manage a company or if they are unemployed. And taking action is a human behavior that brings some risk. And, I want to talk about those risks because I think that every one of you that has tried to exercise leadership is very clear about the fact that leadership is risky business. This is where the theory, like the one we discussed earlier, doesn't fit the fact on the ground. Where are those concepts and the idea that exercise leadership is inherently risky? Where is the idea that making progress require us to do what is needed rather than what is comfortable? Where is in that theory the idea of managing losses and casualties, which sometimes comes with leadership? We are all for trust, purpose, systems, and talent, but we're not talking about putting together a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. We're talking about something of a different domain. So we're talking about the reality, and we know this on a daily basis. Leading, it's risky. And because when leadership matters, you lead people through difficult change. You challenge what they hold dear, with nothing more to offer sometimes than a possibility. So people push back, resist in all sorts of ways. So here is a question for you, and a question that I think is very important to answer, not at a theoretical level, but at a very clear level for all and each of us as we go into this terrain. Why doing it in the first place? Why doing it in the first place? Is world domination equivalent to try to help people? Are Hitler and Pablo Escobar at the trust of their people? They had a purpose. And, hard to say, they had talent as well. Were they leaders? The question I'm asking, of course, is whether or not leadership is value free. And I would say that the notion is pretty clear. I would say that leadership is not value free. That Hitler was not a leader and Pablo Escobar was not a leader. I would say that we need to understand our own purpose to exercise leadership. And I would say that asking the question, leadership for what, is a very important starting point if we want to learn to deploy ourselves. Leadership for what? Leadership is leadership regardless of what it's used for, or leadership is leadership once we have a concept, an idea. So leadership for what? Why do we want to learn about leadership? Why do we want to learn about deploying ourselves? This is an important question because a purpose is nothing more than an overarching sense of direction and contribution that provide us some meaningful orientation to a set of activities. So maybe to start our understanding, maybe what we can do is do some work in understanding our own values and how those values are or not aligned with our own use of power to exercise leadership. And here is something that I think I would love for you to do for a moment. I would like to ask you in a 10-minute breakout with the people that are in this session, why deploying yourself? Why deploying yourself is important? Why is it important? Why deploying yourself, and why deploying yourself is important? If we could start the breakout room, that would be awesome. 10 minutes for answering this question together, thinking together, maybe not necessarily your partner, but other people in this class. I hope in the breakout, I was fortunate to be with one of you. We had a great conversation talking about this and many other important topic. But, would love to actually see if you have a moment to write in the chat why deploying yourself is important. Leadership for what? Would love to see a quick sample. And, it might be a difficult question to answer so synthetically, and yet I think it's an important one. With Chandra, I was with Chandra in the group, and one of the things that we were discussing is even our leadership purpose change. What does it mean to exercise leadership for me today in my context? I think that this is an important question to answer, and a question that I think that we all need to, at the end of the day, really think. Affect positive change. And great, Rihanna. And here's the point. What is that positive change? What does it look like? It look like, because I think we all deploying ourselves in service of change to motivate change. And then, we also need to be pretty clear about what is this work that we're trying to do? What is this work that we want to do? And, I have to be honest with you, my session is meant to be almost a provocation, because the topic of leadership, oh my gosh, everybody talk about leadership. And, I have to tell you, me, myself, when I first approached this topic, I was not that excited. The idea of coming in a room and telling people how to be leader, it was really hard for me. So I don't know, I want to start this kind of provoking that is part of the only possibility, with the only purpose of help you identify what is your own theory of leadership. What is your own idea of what leadership is? So I'm going to challenge your idea and tell you what this class will be based on. And some of those statements will be very weird to you. I promise we will explain them, and we will actually go back to even each of them if you want. But I want you to notice the impression that they make on you, because I think that there is something to learn. A professor of leadership I used to have told me that, if you want to study leadership, you must become a student of your own behavior. And I think that how you react to what I'm about to show you can be a first way to study yourself. What happened if everything you know about leadership was wrong? What would be the impact that would have in your life and in your organization? What if instead of vision, you would talk more about taking responsibility? What if instead of motivation, you start designing environment for performance? What if we, instead of being right, oh my gosh, this is a big one with people that want to lead, we design experiments and we might fail. So something that we might even be wrong, but deal with that differently. What about, instead of being safe, to grow our tolerance for discomfort? Or how about, instead of agreeing to disagree, to see conflict as a creative force? Or instead of making personal or not personal, learn a more skillful way to manage self and role? How about, instead of this dynamics between rational and emotional, we actually start seeing vulnerability as a door for growth? How about, instead of always say, oh, change is low, what if we start asking, where is change happening right now? What if we start changing our perspective on change and realize that people don't hate change, the people hate losses? And this one is going to shock you, I think. What is, instead of think and then act, we actually act first and then we think about it. I mean, this is not meant to be, exhaustive, but I wanted to throw in a few provocations so that we can start our work together with some kind of very clear idea of what is this class and what kind of perspective we're going to share. And I want to inevitably talk about confusion because, with leadership, we inevitably talk about confusion. This is a card that you might have received. And, it points out to a very common confusion that I have found in many years of studying leadership. And the confusion is the confusion between the work, the tools, and the skills. So we often approach leadership thinking about the leader, the individual with the skill, this idea that you need to develop capacity and you need to do something. And so then we define leadership as what the individual leader has. But the work is a bit more complicated than that, much more complicated than that. For example, everybody said that Steve Jobs is a leader, but was he a leader also when he was fired in 1984 from Apple? Was he a leader before? Was he a leader after? Was Churchill a leader in 1945 when he was not re-elected as prime minister? I had to say, I don't use the word, I mean, this would be funny maybe for you, but I don't use the word leader a lot. Because what I had noticed is that it simply denotes that that person exercised leadership on a cause that I personally cared about. And that's why I called them leader. So I found it very interesting. We often are victim of this confusion. We think that power or authority is leadership, while instead is a tool that you can learn to handle, like a carpenter learn, its tools in order to build a house. The skills of leadership are important. You need to learn and to exercise them regularly as you do the work. But the most important thing, and this is something that I really want to ask you to focus, and comes from my training with Ron Eifetz at Harvard Kennedy School. What I really would like to ask you to focus is the work of leadership. What is the work that is in front of you right now? What is that cause, that situation, that context, that trouble that you are ready to jump into? What is it, that beautiful trouble that you want to get into? That is where I would recommend that you start this journey. And that is the reason why I have asked you to identify your purpose. Because you see, there is a huge confusion today when we talk about leadership between those three elements. Very few people focus on the work of leadership. What needs to happen? What is required in this context? People instead focus on the fact that you want to do that work, or that while doing the work, you have or you don't have power, you have or you don't have authority, you have or you don't have influence. My lecture wants to clarify this key confusion. And there is also another confusion, which I think it's really, really strong. Because, the trouble with leadership is that while we are increasing our self-knowledge, we are doing it while we make changes to the world and to ourselves. So it's very hard to distinguish between the inner work of leadership and the outer work of leadership. In other words, you are doing the inner work, maybe of becoming more diplomatic or more comfortable with conflict because you realize that that's your edge and something you want to learn. And there is also work that you have to do in your team, but how do you decide? And, the truth is we cannot distinguish the two. You're going to learn to deal better with conflict while you are actually dealing with conflict with your team. So that is the reason why this key moment, the now moment, becomes really the most important element of this conversation about leadership. What do I want in this now moment? How does my personal leadership, the fact that I want to improve my skills, my ability, with or without authority, meet with the requirement of the world where I'm trying to make change happen? This is a very important question, and a question that, I invite you to consider, because it's confusing to think that there is a distinction between personal leadership and the leadership that you exercise in your team. Your personal growth and the growth that you demonstrate as you handle your job. Because the truth is, the two are connected. We are embedded in situation. We don't become better leader just looking at the mirror. We become better leader by engaging with the world and developing those capacities. This is, of course, just a very quick description, but those two confusion, conflagrating together the work, the tools, and the skills of leadership, and also keeping instead this very, very clear artificial distinction between personal leadership and the leadership you exercise in the world, are two things I want to start, because I want to really ask you to consider the importance of this topic. And with this come also, much more pragmatically, a conversation about your own source of energy, your ability to self-manage and to deal with your own situation in the world and outside of you and inside of you. I will not bother you with the long description of the theory of intrinsic motivation, but there is a school of thought that, and which is what this card refers to, which talk about what is an intrinsic reward, what is a source of energy that bring you an immediate pleasure in the process, giving you a positive boost. So this comes from the research of Kenneth Thomas at University of Chicago. He identified the idea of managing and people and managing self as a composite activity that, involve committing to a larger purpose for some kind of bigger reason, choosing some activity to accomplish that purpose coming from some level of understanding and choice about which activity will I use to do that, perform those activities, monitors those activities if I'm being successful or not, and then monitor the progress towards the purpose. Have I actually been improving in this work? And out of this work, which I found really interesting, because normally when we talk about managing people, we talk about managing some other people. We don't often talk about managing ourselves. And I found it very interesting that this conversation inevitably is strongly connected to the concept of engagement, which we know is a big concept today. And the idea, according to Thomas, is that we are actually motivated by different things, and that all those four different sense of meaningfulness, choice, competence, and progress provide us a positive boost of energy to get directed from your work. I want to be a bit more clear about what I mean here. You are motivated by meaningfulness, for example, if you're one of those persons that need a larger mission, that love to be part of something bigger, something that is worthwhile and makes sense in the world. And you're motivated by choice when you are one of those persons that intrinsically find immense pleasure in deciding which activity will accomplish the purpose that you have to accomplish. Whether that is organizing an event or launching a fundraising campaign or operating a patient, but the ability of actually knowing to make those choices that are the right choice. Other people of us, especially in academia, love to actually be rewarded for their sense of competence. the idea that they are expert in a field, the idea that they know what happened in that field and that they're seen as a guide or a person that can provide guidance on that particular topic. And some of us are absolutely thrilled by that sense of being seen as an expert. Some other people, and I have to say after 20 years in marketing in international companies, I'm probably guilty of this, wants the results, wants the sense of progress. They want to see the needle moving. They want to see the cost go down. They want to see the profit goes up. They want to see the sales increase. They want to see the number of children saved by the program going up. I mean, those are four very large ways to feel that you make sense, that you're motivated, that your energy is leading you in the right direction. Now, people that come to a session like Deploying Yourself, they care about the world and they care about their own motivation. So now I'm going to ask you a very difficult question, very, very difficult question. And I want you to answer with honesty, maybe thinking in reverse, thinking about a job that you hated, where probably you did not have one of those things that you really like. If you were to select only one of those four motivations as your personal intrinsic reward, as you do your work, no matter what your work is, are you motivated by a large mission, a meaningfulness? If that's the case, enter M in your chat. If you're motivated by choice, by the ability to choose the right thing to do in a situation, you will enter CH in the chat. Or maybe you're motivated by competence or by progress, by moving a needle. In that case, you will enter your name and you will enter the word next to it. Chloe, I don't think we have time for a breakout here. I know that it would be super interesting to discuss this further and to actually give you a moment, but I see that we are very close on time. So I'm hesitant to send you in a breakout. What instead I would like for you to do is to reflect and think about what is this telling about yourself and your work as a leader. There are a lot of references that I can provide about this material, but what I would love for you to know is to discover what is your intrinsic reward. What is the one thing that needs to be there in order for you to find this positive boost of energy that sustains you in the work of leading? That is really the big question that I would like to ask you. I want to close today's session telling you about another concept, but I think is related to indirectly to the idea of energy, the idea of intrinsic reward, and it's the concept of bandwidth. This is an important concept which I really would like for you to think for a moment, because this energy that you have, from your work, this positive boost of energy, you positively use it for doing something. And in my work for change, I know that people have three big buckets that they use this work for. They have the buckets of survival. It's the kind of activities that you do at work to keep the light on in order to literally survive, to be able to continue to do your job. Then you have another bucket, which is the bucket of the routine things that you do at work. Those are the things that you're doing on a regular basis, and they're important. They're not survival, but they're important, and you continue to do it regularly. In my experience, it's essential for leaders and people that wants to change the world to realize how big is your survival and routine bucket, because you need some energy left to do your adaptive work. Because I don't know, I can tell you after doing this work for many years, it takes a lot of energy to change organization, teams, or people. You cannot just do it, on the weekend for 35 minutes. It's really, really hard to do it like that. And so what I encourage you to do as change maker, as people that care about deploying yourself in the world, is to think for a moment, what are my buckets? And the only way to find out is to actually take a log and start seeing in my day, how does my bucket look like? Does my bucket look like this? Everything that I do is survival. And, it's done in a hurry. I don't have time to think. I just have to do it and move on so that it's out of my to-do list. And my work, I do some routine work. And of course, as a result, my adaptive work becomes really, really minimal. That's an important monitoring system. At the end of the day, with this tool of bandwidth, what it wants to do is provide each of us as a way to make sense of what is happening in our life. How are we actually living? How are we actually using the source of energy that comes from our intrinsic reward? Is maybe our buckets more like this? Our survival is minimal, but we are flooded with things that we do on a routinely basis. And there is very little space for the work of adaptation and change for ourselves and others. And so the question I would like to ask you, which I challenge you to answer in this week, as you think about this topic and this conversation we had today, this lecture we had today, is what is your mix of daily activities? Taking a diary for a week and then reflect on it can become incredibly valuable for you to understand if you do have time or energy, if you have the bandwidth for the change that you want to create in the world. I am always humbled how the bandwidth tool allow people to make sense of their work activities and give them a name, give them a bucket, identify them. And after you make sense of those activities, I normally know that very important insight can emerge. Insight about, for example, how you use your time. Insight about what is important to you. Insight about how can you actually make space, maybe for this work of deploying yourself in the world in order for you to make a positive change. I hope that this information and this lecture was helpful to you. What I wanted to summarize very briefly is that we have talked about the concept of leadership and how this concept is often confused the work, the tools, and the skills, conflagrating them together. We have said at the beginning the importance of understanding why we want to lead. What is the purpose? Leadership for what? We have talked about what are the sources of energy, the sources of intrinsic motivation that lead our work as we lead. And finally, we talk about the bandwidth, the importance of understanding in our daily activities, how do we actually bring an adaptive, a routine, and survival bucket to everything that we do in our life. It's 8 o'clock, and officially we're finished, but the truth is we are not finished at all. And I'm here, and I would love to answer your question. I left you speechless, which I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. So I think you're touching on a very important thing, Catherine, because, I'm familiar with the nonprofit world, very generous people working and running around, trying to change the world when the computer doesn't even boot sometime. And so I'm familiar with that kind of environment. I've lived in nonprofit for a few years. Here is my answer. I know that it's very tempting to apply those topics that we're discussing to a larger organizational perspective. My invitation and my prayer is to, for now, to bring them to your own personal life. So for example, Catherine, when she walked in her office as a nonprofit manager, out of the 50 things that she does during the day, where she would put those 50 things? She would put them in which bucket? So I do agree with you that sometimes, you know, the need to change become a survival mode because it's the board that required it, and so I have to do it. I have no choice. But you know, that leads us into another conversation, which might be for another, or maybe we can have me and you. But for this specific deploying yourself topic, what I recommend, and I see there is a question from Matt asking me to define the buckets, it's really however you define those buckets. So what is survival for you? What is routine for you? And what is adaptive, meaning that kind of energy that you put in order to face already what happened tomorrow? You know, when you are in survival mode, it's very hard for you to start thinking about, you know, losing weight, for example, or do some activity that help with your spirituality or with other area of your life. Now, my recommendation for now, for the beginning, is to do the bandwidth for your own work life, just to start and becoming familiar with the tool. Throwing those things in the buckets, and let's see what is the result. What is, after a week, oh my gosh, look, why is this survival? This is not survival at all. After a week, you have incredible insight about your own personal way to live, which I have to say, and this is the weird answer, Catherine, that I want to give you, you may not even know what is in the bucket right now, if I were to ask you. I know that after I took a diary one time when I was presented this tool for a couple of weeks, I did incredible discovery about myself that I didn't even know I was doing. If you were to ask me a question there, I would have said, no, I am not like this, I'm like that. And that's the reason why I think that taking the diary is probably the best way to learn about bandwidth. Catherine, I hope that this helped in front of a beer about how to deal with the craziness of the nonprofit world. Anytime. I've been there myself. So the bucket are the, you know, just so we clarify, the idea here is to define the different things that we do during the day. So survival means, what is it that I have to do? Otherwise, I don't survive. Otherwise, I will not have a job. Otherwise, I won't be able to function. Well, what do I have to do absolutely in order to survive? Now, as I said, I recommend you use this tool for work as you start. So what are those things that you do as you walk into your office that you need to do? There's no discussion. The president asks you for a presentation. You cannot say no, you have to do it. That's, you know, it's not routine, it doesn't ask every day. It's survival, you got to do it. It's an emergency, you deal with that. You do it every day. What is routine? What is that you do on a regular basis that is part of a routine for a reason? And what is adaptive? What is that part of what you're doing that is already looking at what you're becoming and how you can become better? How you're actually changing. Here is how to make sense of the bandwidth. I hope that this explained, Matt. Otherwise, I'm happy to discuss this further. And I'm happy to take more questions. This is very, very exciting. Matt, the goal is for now just to understand where we actually put our time and try to see if our time is where we think it is. That's the first big reflection. The second reflection is, yes, identify if we have any energy and what energy do we have today at the individual level to deploy ourselves and to make change happen in the world. Because, you know, I want you to affect positive change. I don't want you to die on the barricades. I don't want you to actually say that you do change and then change doesn't happen. So the goal is a goal of personal understanding and knowledge. And the second goal, I would say, yes, understand how we can increase that little adaptive component that we discussed. Any question from anyone on any of the topic we discussed? And of course, this is after 8, so if you need to drop, I totally understand. Sylvia, you should have been assigned a buddy by my friend of Hopkins at home. So I will make sure that you have one by next time. And, you know, call them on the phone, connect through email. My recommendation is to take advantage of that and really, truly talk to them and see what they think. You know, compare your notes. Yes, that's right. Spam folder is often at fault here. Sophie, Jane, Megan, Joel, any question? I see you on camera, so I assume that maybe you have any question or anything you would like to talk at this time. This is a big topic. I mean, don't get me started to talk about leadership. We can talk for a few hours, but I promise that my answer will be short. Yes, yes, absolutely. And I'm happy to send one that I think it's really very, very important. It's a form that is inspired by that professor that I talked to before about how to become a student of your own behavior. And so in that list, there are a few questions that are really very, very powerful, whose question might even be a little hard to ask, but question nevertheless important to start the question. I would say that the key question to ask here is leadership for what? And I would say that that is always a critical one. And that's the reason why I sent you a card of purpose as a way to start this conversation. And the second question, I think it would be to understand what motivates you. What is your source of energy? I found that conversation in a team to be illuminating. I can provide additional resources on intrinsic motivation at work, which is a book that I recommend that has a lot of guidance about how to understand that, because it talks about how to create motivation, not by the traditional way, I'm motivated by the boss, but how to put everyone in a position where they can rely on their own intrinsic motivation to flourish. And it's really a very different perspective than what we are used. And then finally, this one that we discuss now, on everything that we do at work. What is survival? What is routine? And what is adaptive? I mean, it has the potential after a week of journaling to really give you as a team great power in understanding what is going on in your office. I hope that this answers your question. Yes, yes. I'm telling you, that's a lot of what we're doing in this 4 days, thinking about our thoughts and also thinking about those thoughts that we don't even think we have.
Yes.
You know, that maybe are hidden. Thank you, Sadie. Thank you. Thank you very much. I didn't forget, Joel. What was your question? Yeah. For example, you walk in the office and you respond to email. You respond to email because there is an urgent one, or is that a routine? You do that for 15 minutes every day, no matter what, you know, and if there is, or maybe something urgent comes through the email, isn't it? As often is. Yeah. And maybe you know that a pattern is that you spend 2 hours a day dealing with urgent messages that come from email. I mean, that would go in the bucket of survival. What is actually routine? You have a meeting, a staff meeting that you do routinely, is the regular meeting that always happens. And then after you do that, you actually decide to, in your break, to hear a TED Talk. Here is an adaptive, would fall into the adaptive because you're trying to learn something new and to face the future. And then you receive a phone call about a report that you have to send to a manager. Here is a survival, something that you have to do. You have no choice. And you know what you will start seeing then after a week is patterns of how, what you consider, of course, survival, what you consider routine, what you consider adaptive. And that is what this exercise is all about. It's about sense making. So I'm hesitant to tell you exactly what goes into which. I would say that everything that is survival needs to be done. Everything that is adaptive, where planning and setting up systems in some organization is so pervasive that it's survival. So Matt, I have a hard time making this distinction because I don't know your context. If it's, here is a good answer. If it's something you can say no without any repercussion, you know that is not survival. If it's something you can say no and everybody will be fine, you know that is not survival. Even if you feel that it's survival and it's not, it's perfectly fine. Planning and setting up systems is beautiful, but I know for experience that in some organization, that is what creates the urgency of everything urgent and therefore survival. So I'm hesitant to tell you the category. I would like for you to make sense of this yourself. And that is part of the exercise. I hope that this helped, Joel. But yes, that kind of, oh my gosh, I don't know which category is which. I think you do, Joel. Okay, sorry about that. So Madhavi, as you have seen, we have actually discussed a lot of the things we discussed in the breakout.
Yes.
We were talking about this understanding, you know, what we want to do. Yes, and you know, changing the world is, or deploying yourself for change takes some time. And so I would say that the first imperative here is to find the time, to find the space to actually do this intentionally so that we can succeed.
Yes.
Tara, Cindy, Sophie, Megan, anything, I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, you know, it's a beautiful evening in wherever you are, and excited to be here again a week from now at 7 p.m. For our next session of Deploying Yourself. You have my email address just in case. I'm going to put it here so that if you want to, I give you my my personal one, very easy to remember. Any question about the exercise, any reference you would like to receive, I'm happy to actually share it with you. This has been a great pleasure. I really, really look forward to actually see you all next week at 7 p.m. for our second session of Deploying Yourself.